Hello, and thank you for joining us for the third webinar in our series, focusing on coronavirus shopping trends. Today would have been our annual think tank conference, so even though we can't all be together face to face, we are pleased to still be able to share insights with you remotely. It's now nearly been 3 months since we were asked to stay at home, but as the lockdown begins to ease and the economy slowly opens back up, we're starting to get early indicators of what life will be like in the future, including online shopping habits. In this webinar, we review data from across the network, focusing on May, and put a spotlight on some of the sectors we've been yet to cover. These include the business sector, a review of the car and bike sector and which is looking to win in the battle of the commutes, and differences in the beauty sector and the luxury versus everyday beauty segments. We look again to the home and garden sector, which we first looked at in our newsletter this month, Pulse. We review how the opening of garden centres is impacting online volume and analyse other countries who are further ahead in being opened up to see how the wider online sector may be impacted as further lockdown easing measures continue to be announced. I'm Ros Beresford, the Client Partnerships Director here at Awin UK, and again I'm joined by our sector specialists, Joelle Hillman, our Retail and Travel Client Partner, Alex Palmer-Yee, our Telco and Finance Client Partner, and Jessica Brown, our Agency Partner. We will again end the session with a live Q&A. We'll have about 30 minutes of content, and then you can submit questions all the way through by using the small toolbar that appears in the middle of the screen and select the Show Q&A icon. A chat bar will open up the side of the screen for you to type your question or comment. You can also upvote questions submitted by others. So to kick off the entertainment this month, I'm going to take a look at the home entertainment sector. We wanted to take a look at the performance of the sector year to date and how things may have changed in lockdown. We wanted to focus on subsectors for entertainment in the home, so books and subscriptions, entertainment superstore, and PC and video games. The chart on the left shows the total Awin sales across these three subsectors. You can see that the overall sector saw large growth in March and April as customers looked for ways to keep occupied during lockdown. Volumes have then started to plateau in May as the weather got a little bit better. The chart to the right shows how these are split by those three subsectors, and we can see it's really the books and subscriptions category that's really driven this growth, which is also a larger sector overall. However, all the subsectors have seen growth as we've moved further into the year, and social distancing continued to keep us at home and in need of entertainment. When looking at conversion rate to the side there, this started to lift in March, but there has been a significant increase from April to May of 0.4%, despite the overall sales volumes remaining flat, so we're seeing slightly fewer clicks. Conversion rates for these subsectors is therefore really strong at about 6.3%. Average order value has stayed relatively consistent between £40 and £50, which can be expected by the repeat purchase nature of the subscription side of things in particular, so that's more likely than higher individual basket values, even with growth overall. When looking at this growth on a publisher level, we can see 8 key subtypes that have driven this growth: direct linking, discount codes, comparison sites, and the others that are on the screen. The coloured graph shows the performance of each publisher type year to date, and the turquoise line with number 1 next to it represents direct linking, and you can see this saw a really marked climb from March to April. Investigating this further, this has been particularly driven by publishers working as comparison shopping services, or CSS. These publishers support advertisers by getting their products listed within the shopping results on Google. Advertisers have to work with at least one CSS partner to begin placing shopping ads, and therefore this publisher type is seeing really strong volumes across the retail landscape. It's the books and subscriptions subsector where CSS publishers are seeing the most success in this entertainment space specifically. The Black Lives Matter movement has also impacted volumes in this sector over the last week, with booksellers seeing a large spike in volume for particular titles, as many of us look to educate ourselves about the movement and race relations more generally. I'll now hand over to Alex, who's going to discuss what else is keeping us entertained.
So while some forms of entertainment have seen healthy increases, there's one type that's been noticeably absent from public life and discussion, and that is live sports. The postponement of the Premier League, as well as the rest of football and the rest of sports, has meant that many have sought refunds or cancellation of sports TV add-ons and sports TV packages, which has obviously had a notable impact on sales across the network. So, however, in recent weeks, this story has been developing, and the graph here shows the total number of sales of these sports TV packages on Awin, and sort of how they've developed as changes to the Premier League have happened. So, in mid to late May, many clubs started training as momentum for a season restart started building. Details of the government and Football League discussions emerged on the 20th of May, and on the 22nd, the chief exec of the Premier League stated he was confident of a June restart on a BBC interview, and that excitement sort of caused our first surge in sales shortly after. 5 days later, clubs unanimously backed a June restart, and the government greenlit resumption of competitive sport behind closed doors on the 30th. However, one area that has been unclear for this whole period has been where the matches will be shown. The government was keen to move some of these matches to free-to-air channels to go and avoid mass gatherings. And so throughout this period, there maybe hasn't been that consumer clarity on what channels were needed to watch your beloved football team. So actually, although there's been spikes driven by all of this excitement, the real impact has really been in the days following sort of confirmation of the match allocations, which are being split across Sky Sports, BT Sports, the free Pick TV, BBC, as well as Amazon. And I think once this has been confirmed, we started seeing that surge. And so looking at the early June data, we still see that noticeable spike there. And sales are now sort of hitting the 200 per day 200 sort of sales per day mark. So a noticeable increase from only a couple of months ago. So there are many lessons here. So even if you don't work in home telecoms, there are lessons here. So if you're an advertiser or you work in a sector where products and services potentially have been restricted and are now beginning to be reopened to the public, there's a lesson here that that although as easing of restrictions happen and excitement really sort of builds as details trickle through to consumers, actually what consumers are really sort of potentially craving is that certainty, especially at times like this. And that's what's going to really drive the custom. So it's just a real interesting point if your sector has any parallels to this. So with some forms, so from one type of footwork to another, so it's been widely reported in the press that they've seen sort of growing interest in cycling, both as a form of exercise, but potentially as a more popular form of commuting. In addition to this, at the start of the lockdown, the use of cars was limited to essential trips, as well as the occasional eye test. So the question we wanted to explore was, would more people opt for the saddle over the steering wheel as lockdown eases, especially with the growth in environmental awareness? So looking from the end of April, it seems that we were sort of seeing more sales go to cycle-based products. And so cycle-based products includes the sales of bikes and bike accessories, as well as bike insurance. So that's all been lumped together. And that we're comparing against automotive products, which again includes really similar sort of mixes there, but auto care, car rentals, car breakdown products, and car insurance. And so as we sort of, as said, if we look at towards the end of the April, the cycle sector seems to be outperforming the automotive space. However, Monday, the 11th of May, saw the government message change from stay at home to stay alert, and with it, lifting of exercise limits, and also allowing people to sort of drive as far as they want to beauty spots without restriction. So what did this cause? Well, the following on Friday and Saturday saw the weekly automotive spike. So you may notice the automotive sector is very cyclical, but the spike sort of grew. And that was really driven by a sort of a noticeable increase in car insurance policies, as potentially some people who maybe sort of forgo insurance when their cars want to drive sort of got their new policies, but also due to sort of increases in sort of auto care products. So potentially sort of adding some maintenance to sort of neglected cars, which might have flat batteries. And since then, the spikes are getting larger and larger, and the reopening of the economy this month seems to be driving it up further. So whilst I think cycle usage is up, the car is obviously going to remain sort of the primary mode of transport when you compare the two side by side. That being said, I expect this to develop further as more urban workforces and city dwellers start returning to work, and maybe they will opt for the bike over public transport on a crowded underground or bus. In addition, this story is likely to develop further. So electric scooters, which are currently illegal on UK roads, were actually due to be sort of considered for legalization pre-COVID. And the government maybe will now need to accelerate this as they look at alternative modes of transport. So perhaps this new to the UK sector may sort of emerge and help sort of maintain some of those air quality improvements that we've seen during lockdown. So speaking of commuting normally plays quite an influential role on when we shop. So the data normally shows that many spend their morning commute going through promotional emails and engaging in some early morning shopping on the way to work. And the graph here shows the sales share across Awin UK by hour, and we split it out by month. So the earlier months, January and February and March, are in grey, and then the more recent months are in a more bluey colour. And so if we look at pre-lockdown, so the pre-lockdown months, January and February particularly, 6 a.m. to 9 a.m. is when online shopping really begins to start gaining speed in terms of sales volume, with it plateauing between 10 a.m. and 3 p.m. Then as people finish work, there's that steady rise to this 8 p.m. peak in the evening. And then obviously, then we expect sales to slow down as people go to bed until the early hours of the morning. Now, as lockdown took hold, there was a big change, obviously, in our commutes. They shortened down from potentially being a tube journey, a car journey, a bike journey, to the walk from your bedroom to your dining table. And this has meant a lot of us were able to wake up a bit later. And as such, we're seeing this the shape of the day and the share of sales by hour really sort of shifting. So we're seeing that obviously the rise is has moved a bit later on in the day. And in addition, we're also seeing the pace of sales, so the increase. There's not that plateau after 9 a.m. We're seeing it's obviously keeps going up. And actually, the share of sales in what are traditionally work hours has grown significantly. In fact, the rise has been so significant that 5 till 6 p.m. is actually the new peak for sales in the average day in the post-lockdown months, dethroning the evening, which is also actually just down generally in terms of share of sales. So to dissect this further, let's look at how share has shifted by hour, just comparing January and February, the pre-lockdown January and February, against the post-lockdown April and May. So the rise in traditional working hours is really apparent in this graph here, and you can see that really there by those huge increases, particularly if you look at sort of 10 a.m. and 11 a.m. And there are a few reasons why this is happening. So those still working, maybe in the comfort of their own home, and maybe comfortable sort of peppering their workflows with the occasional buying break. In addition, for those who live with others, bigger buying decisions no longer need to wait all the way until dinner time. And now you can make those purchasing decisions by simply just shouting across the room potentially. And that means that obviously you're able to buy early in the day and secure fast delivery, which is really important in sort of times like this when you can't necessarily go in store. And then finally, as discussed in previous webinars, the closure of physical stores has obviously moved daytime high street shoppers online. And again, these shoppers' volumes and sales are probably going to be causing shifts here. The drop in share for evening shops, though, provides some insights in maybe the role that shopping and online shopping plays in people's lives. So if we looked back in January and February, those old evening spikes and why they happen. So potentially it says that evening shopping is really more driven out of necessity and restrictions on people's time during the working day, as opposed to what some maybe would have theorized as the post-work retail therapy session. So hopefully the drop in share here is indicative of people spending a lot more time relaxing and maybe spending more quality time with loved ones at the current time. And so the takeaway really here from this graph, as well as obviously it's really interesting to go and see how these macro trends have sort of impacted Awin data, is for those who sort of are setting the start and end dates of campaigns, or maybe the send times of sort of promotional emails, is if you haven't reviewed the times that you're starting and ending campaigns since lockdown, there's probably an argument here that you maybe need to go and relook at this, as otherwise you might be hitting the wrong moments. So from changes in business hours to changes in business behavior, I'm going to hand you over to Jess to provide some business-to-business insights.
Thank you, Alex. In this section, I'll be taking a look at the business sector and how business-to-business or B2B advertisers have been broadening their reach from the UK's estimated 5.9 million businesses as of 2019 to include direct-to-consumer sales, with the increase in demand from commercial supplies and services from home workers. As we explore the B2B offering and affiliates, it's important to note that generally lead generation is the traditional publisher type synonymous with the sector, offering a cost per lead CPL setup and targeted email database sends. As a network, Awin supports this commission model with our lead gen partnerships. However, with a cost per acquisition CPA setup supporting content such as rewards and customer journey optimization, the current affiliate partners provide B2B advertisers with a unique way to attract customers. It would also be interesting to see if there's a market for B2B influencers on the horizon, with eMarketer estimating that the number of social buyers in the UK will rise to 10 million in 2020, a 13% increase from 2019. Could we be seeing businesses adopt this marketing technique, or does an Insta link in bio stray far too far from the formal business purchase orders driven over email? Looking at our Awin data across some of the B2B microsectors, we can see trends emerge supported by Google Trends data, which saw an increase in searches for the term bulk buy from the middle of March onwards. The table shows performance since the lockdown announcement on the 26th of March until the end of May, when we saw announcements start to lift on working restrictions versus sales for the previous pre-lockdown period. First up, we looked at office services, and with 52% increase in traffic and 8% increase in sales, alongside a decline in AOV by 43%, we can see that demand for office-related products has increased with the working from home consumer, but at a smaller basket spend versus the pre-lockdown wholesale office manager orders. The reduction of office services and suppliers conversion rates versus increase in traffic presents an opportunity for the current 31% decline in revenue to grow, and for B2B clients to adapt to the increase in demand for business relevant products with some direct-to-consumer content. The surge in home shoppers since the lockdown began, alongside the steady incline in sales, may not, however, fully match the numbers of pre-lockdown larger orders placed by companies catering for an entire office building. As we move down the table to the postal services sector, the average conversion rate has increased considerably by 15%, alongside a 34% increase in traffic and 61% increase in sales. With commercial delivery demand on the rise, with businesses having to move away from a store to online purchasing model, the data supports the notion of a direct-to-consumer with the lower basket spend trend running across the B2B landscape. It's a similar story for advertisers offering online courses, and with numbers reaching 8.9 million of those furloughed in the UK, according to Statista, sales received increased 61% and revenue grew by 54%. This again demonstrates how a previous B2B market is now appealing to a D2C market, with many looking to skill up on business courses during lockdown. The publisher data supports this trend too, with an increase in 27% in number of publishers actively driving conversions. In terms of average number of publishers driving performance across the sector, we see this also increase for office supplies and delivery companies. This supports how, as an industry, affiliates can be incredibly reactive to what content they serve consumer audiences based on trending searches. And it's also positive to see publishers follow this trend, when 69% of publishers recently said in a survey conducted by Awin last month that COVID has had a negative impact on their affiliate businesses. Broadband has bucked the trend slightly, with a 7% decline in broadband business publishers. Comparison was the largest publisher type, dropping down as the focus on business shift towards a working from home broadband setup across the UK. It's worth noting that reporting on AOV is slightly skewed in the way that we track sales for some of our business broadband clients at Awin. Even so, traffic for the micro sector increased by 5% for the business-centric product offering. We project that traffic increases wasn't driven by businesses looking for a new provider, but rather due to research being conducted around current payment plan information and comparing rates while not currently in use from many offices. From business to beauty, we've seen the B2B sector attract a new consumer type, and now we'll revisit how the beauty sector is helping us look attractive as we emerge from our homes alongside the easing of lockdown. So last month, we took a deep dive into the health and beauty sector and found that it was 57% up in April year on year. However, AOV was actually down 12% at £47. As the biggest product driving the growth were essential beauty products such as sun cream and other skincare. As one of our key retail sectors, and with the easing of lockdown starting in June, we wanted to re-look at more recent data and see how things have changed. With it now possible to meet up with up to 6 people outside, we wanted to investigate if the mix had changed and if the luxury products and brands were now back in our baskets as we prepare to show ourselves to the world without the benefit of touch-up Zoom filters. The chart to the left shows overall sales trends up to Monday the 8th of June, continue to show strong performance year on year since COVID. Where the beauty sector was slightly down as a sector in Q1 at -11%, Q2 so far is 42% up. In the last few weeks, we have seen the sales volume start to decline compared to peaks of earlier lockdown. On the right, we can see average order value, AOV, has stayed relatively static at £60 throughout the pandemic and year on year, although there was a spike in AOV last March. Whilst the conversion rate in the sector is really strong overall and has increased since mid-March from 7 to 7.4%. We've grouped together the beauty brands across the network into the 2 main market segments, luxury versus everyday. We expect to see luxury makeup brands starting to grow volumes more than the everyday, but they actually followed a very similar trend line. However, when looking at the year-on-year picture, we can clearly see a huge swing towards luxury beauty products compared to the usual seasonal volumes during COVID. In May, luxury beauty retailers were actually up 190% year on year, whilst everyday beauty retailers were up just 18%. When looking at a selection of our key retailers who sell a mixture of everyday and luxury brands and products, the top 10 products sold so far in June focus on mid to high-end brands and products such as face peels, night concentrates and face masks of the skincare variety, with some makeup sets as well. Whereas last month, the top sellers were more hand and foot creams, and looking back further, they focused even more on functional beauty, such as cotton wool pads and hair products. Our theory, therefore, does just about seem to play out in the numbers. The difference in the most recent data since the lockdown easing announcements wasn't as stark as we could have predicted, but luxury beauty products and brands have seen an increase in more recent weeks with the easing of lockdown. But we have seen strong year-on-year growth throughout when comparing COVID. When looking at brand size, we are again seeing real success across our smaller direct-to-consumer beauty portfolio, which echoes an overarching trend we've seen as a network level through COVID and has also been seen elsewhere. Glossy reported a trend that many beauty direct-to-consumer brands moving back to their old roots and away from partnerships with the likes of Amazon to sell their products. I'll now hand over to Joelle to talk around the gardening sector as we see stores start to reopen across the UK.
Thanks, Jess. As we all know, non-essential stores went into lockdown from the 23rd of March. And whilst many stores remain shut until next week, we have seen movement in the home and garden sector. Garden centres opened on the 13th of May. We've analysed the differences year on year in terms of sales performance across this sector. Right from the beginning of the year, home and garden saw strong sales performance, up 17% versus the same performance across January to March 2019. And following the lockdown, we saw the market thrive even more so online. On the 29th of April, many of the big DIY brand stores began to reopen, and across the country, by the 13th of May, garden centres had reopened. Between March in lockdown and May when we reopened, the full lockdown period, we saw garden sales online up 145% year on year. Following the reopening, that week alone, on that first week when we reopened, we saw sales online down just by 5% week on week. However, year on year, online performance is still up hugely at 90% year on year. However, it wasn't just the lockdown that was responsible for this boost in garden sales, particularly during that big peak within April. In fact, in April, the phrase "Are garden centres reopening soon" was Googled more times than queries surrounding school closures. The Brits really do love their gardens. As we can see, the biggest peak in the gardening sector came in early April. and together with our hottest day in the UK year to date. On this graph, the darker blue dots show weather by day, and the dark blue line provides a trend line averaging each week. The light blue represents sales. On Sunday, the 5th of April, we hit 19 degrees in the UK, and in line with our rising temperatures, we also saw a rise in sales. In fact, the very next day, on Monday the 6th, we hit our biggest sales day. It's worth noting this was also the week leading up to Easter weekend, which started on Friday the 10th of April. And that Monday to Thursday, we saw sales up 45% versus the same period the previous week. As you can see on this graph, if we jump towards the end of May and early June, we begin to see temperatures rising again. And we again saw a slight jump in sales. So week commencing 18th of May, temperatures hit 22 degrees on average for that week, up 14 degrees from the week previous, and this drove an 11% increase in sales. It's safe to say that the UK got ahead of the gardening curve this year and planned to plant their new flowers in early spring. This April peak also aligned with our Grow Your Own trend, which we touched upon in our April webinar. We saw this trend across Awin sales numbers as well as Google search trends. And we even read that requests for allotments hit a 5-year high this April. As mentioned, whilst we have seen movement in the garden centre, the UK shops are still shut. However, our European neighbours have seen stores reopen. And as we all wait in anticipation for the UK high street to come back, we can predict the trends that we'll start to see online. We've taken a look at how the high street changes across the other European markets have affected online sales. The line graphs depict sales performance by market. The padlock demonstrates the beginning of their lockdown dates by market, and the house logo demonstrates the date on which stores began to reopen again. In Spain, smaller shops began to reopen right from the 11th of May, albeit at limited capacity. All shops were open by the end of that month. The week that shops began to open in Spain, Awin saw a slight 2% decrease in sales across retail. However, year on year, sales volumes remained flat. In DACH, Germany, Austria and Switzerland, some of the smaller markets began to see stores reopen from mid-April. And by the 20th of May, the larger market, Germany, also reopened their stores. Following that date, we saw a slight increase in sales week on week, actually by 3%, and sales year on year were trending upwards again at 1%. And when we have a look at Italy, stores in this market began to open on the 18th of May. Performance here told a very similar story to Spain. Week on week, sales performance of retail was down slightly by 11%. However, year on year, it was trending up still by 1%. Whilst the UK non-essential shops are allowed to trade again from this Monday, I'll predict that as we have seen across the other territories, week on week we may see some marginal sales dips. However, year on year online performance will continue to stay strong. I'm also excited to keep an eye on sales performance by day once the stores reopen, similar to Alex's slide earlier, especially if the changes in Sunday trading laws do come into fruition.
Thanks, Joelle. It's really interesting to see what other markets are seeing as their high streets start to open up, and I look forward to comparing how the UK fares over the coming weeks. Thank you all for listening, and as usual, we've put aside time at the end to talk through any questions that you might have submitted. If you're yet to ask one but would like to do so, you can use the small toolbar that appears in the middle of the screen and select the Show Q&A icon. A chat bar then appears on the side and you can either type your question or comment. I'll now hand over to Alex, who's going to moderate the questions submitted so far for us.
Thank you. So we are yet actually to have a moderated question sent through. So I'm going to go and ask a question, maybe a personal question about how your shopping habits have changed. So we've obviously across the series of the webinar, we've been seeking to explain as much as possible about how shopping habits have changed during lockdown, but maybe trying to predict a little bit on what habits would change post-lockdown. So I'll direct this one to yourself, Ros, first. But is there any habits that you've picked up in terms of shopping since lockdown that that you intend maybe to keep on even once everything is opened up again?
Oh, that's an interesting one. I think for me personally, it is about trying to support local where possible. And I think I mentioned this last time, but we do love our local restaurants and local bakeries. And it's actually great to see more have opened up since last month. It's probably takes a little while, particularly in that sector and kind of the hospitality who still aren't open up yet. It's taken them a little while to work out, especially smaller local ones, what type of food can transport, how people can reheat it. It might be kind of like a half cooked scenario where they sort of deliver some of it and you have to re-prepare some of it yourselves. But we've definitely loved that, especially because we're at home and we can't go into restaurants. And it's been really exciting actually to see more and more of those coming. One of our best friends' restaurants, I hadn't been able to work it out, actually launched last week, and now they're starting to deliver, which is great. For anyone in London, Patty and Bun do an absolutely amazing kind of make your own burger kit. Bit of a plug there, another client, but it is fantastic. So I think for me in particular, that's where we've really, I suppose, did a change to what we normally do. We normally buy everything online anyway, so maybe we're not the good example in terms of in store versus online, but definitely in terms of what we're buying, it's definitely a different mix.
Yeah, I don't know if the other Jess or Joelle, if you have anything that you've picked up that you're going to sort of carry on after lockdown.
Maybe not carry on, but controversial. I'm massively missing like a good shopping trip in store. Definitely finding some of the online shops I've done, they never turn out exactly how you see them. I don't care what anyone says, but I do find like a lot of the stuff I would buy in store, such as shopping and things, I've definitely moved to online groceries. And similar to some of our beauty things that we've looked at, the insights that I went through, I've definitely started shopping online for them just because it's a little bit cheaper, I found. So that's definitely here to stay.
No, that's great. We have a question from Stuart, who just mentioned if we will be sharing the deck and recording the webinar. So yeah, I believe this webinar is being recorded, so as a follow-up, you will be able to access this recording. There's also, just to plug, there's also recordings of our previous two webinars. If this is the first time you've tuned into a client partnerships one, as well as the sector-based webinars that we've hosted over the past few weeks. So there's one for the telecom sector, the travel sector, and the retail sector. So we have this question here from an anonymous question asker, which says, with shops in the UK opening up over the next week, which sectors do you think will see the biggest decline in online orders and traffic? So Joelle, I'm going to go and direct this at you.
That's a super interesting question. I think that some of the sectors that will begin to see a decrease online in terms of traffic are perhaps some of the trickier items to purchase online. So, for example, I think actually, probably controversially, my opinion differs to Jess in that I'm quite comfortable purchasing clothing online, and I'd probably prefer to do that from a personal ease perspective. Whereas products such as furniture and goods for the home and much more difficult products to sort of be able to interact with online, I think we'll definitely see a decrease where people will start to continue to visit those stores again. I think for the moment, beauty will continue to do quite well in store and online, just because the salons still won't be open. So I think people will still be looking online for some of those hacks to help us in terms of our hair dye and our eyebrow treatments. Yeah,
no, that's really interesting. I mean, from a finance and telecoms perspective, I think if anything, we've seen a lot of so finance obviously isn't sold an awful lot in store, but telecoms, which I think there used to obviously be a high street presence, it's very much emerging that that we're obviously seeing a number of store closures for like people like Virgin Media who are not going to be selling offline on the high street, and also impacts with mobile phones with Carphone Warehouse, and I imagine it will impact others there. So I think in theory actually some sectors may also see an increase as the realities of the economic outlook become more apparent there. So Roz, I'm going to go and direct this one at you, and it's again from an anonymous question asker, but it says, what predictions do you have for consumer behaviour around Black Friday this year, and do we have any early indications or insights?
Oh, that's a good question. I've had another client ask me this recently, actually. I think it's what will really help with that question is what we see over the next few weeks. I think it's been really interesting looking at what's happened with garden centres, because that was the first sector that we'd seen go through the lockdown period with all the physical stores shut, and then that we'd seen to start to open up. And I think the fact that they are seeing declines since the garden centres have opened up makes sense in terms of online home and garden purchasing, but the fact that they're so considerably up still year on year, I think gives hopefully a really positive indication that not just for Black Friday, but for the rest of the year, we should see a strong picture. They are still, the latest stats that we've looked at, it is in decline. So it's I think the stats were still 90% up year on year for that sector, even since the garden centres have opened again. But we do see that trend line. It's not a sharp decline, but it's more of a gradual decline. So I think once we've got more data from the next kind of 6 weeks, it'll be really interesting to maybe get a bit more of a normal picture about kind of what the new normal looks like. We already predicted that, people have been forced online. We won't see these huge volumes stay, but the fact that people have bought beauty online, they've risked buying a new foundation and used maybe tools on site to select their skin colour and find the best match, and they've hopefully enjoyed it. I know the first time I did that I was a bit worried about it, but it was absolutely fine. And I think since people have hopefully had a positive experience online, they won't continue to do all of their shopping online as they have to now, really, but they will hopefully do more of it. So I suppose early indications would be that it will be stronger than it was last year. I think every year we say, I don't think it's going to get bigger. It can't get bigger than the year before. It's been so huge, and every year it surprises us and does. So I'd like to say maybe confidently it will be bigger than what we saw last year. But I think with Black Friday in particular, there's always changes in what happens to the weeks before and after Black Friday. We obviously have Cyber Monday, the following Monday, which is usually bigger in the US. And usually that's the only country I think that sees that Monday as stronger day than the Black Friday itself, which is interesting as Black Friday originated in the States. But we do see more and more advertisers do offers in the weeks coming up to Black Friday, and that can impact the volumes that we see on the day itself. So it's almost more like Black Friday fortnight in terms of all of the offers that happen at that time of year, if not for obviously the whole month of November and into December. It's big. So I think it's looking positive so far. I think it's something that we'd actually like to do more of a piece on once we've got more data over the next 4 to 6 weeks, and to start putting out some predictions once we've seen the trends and we've seen what's happened with the shops opening up. It's going to be really interesting to see how it impacts us, and obviously it's got to continue to change over time.
Yeah, that's really interesting insights there, and I think it's definitely a story that we'll continue to follow. So Rich asks, we saw a shift in timings during the day that people are online shopping, which were in one of my slides there, but have we seen a similar shift in plateau in the days of the week? So interestingly, we actually covered this in our client partnerships newsletter, and again, information on how to subscribe to this will obviously be included in the follow-up. But what we actually did, so we did pretty much a really similar sort of graph looking at share of sales by day, and looked at how it changed from January, and we looked all the way up until May there. And so normally what actually the biggest days are Sunday and Monday tend to be there, and then it sort of flattens out, and then you see sort of an occasional sort of pickup around the sort of end of sort of just before Saturday. So Saturday actually tends to be quite a weak day, and I think it's probably because people are focusing more on leisure activities there. Now, what's happened since this is we saw Monday actually became a really small day, and the week became more sort of pyramid shaped actually. So Thursday and Friday became quite big days, but actually May's data is really showing it even flatten out more, and so yeah, there is more sales happening in the week, and then there's like a little drop off on Saturday and Sunday. But again, it's I think again, I know a lot of offers plans and cashback sites and voucher code sites and newsletters are always focused around these peaks. And again, that's sort of changed quite a bit. And I think we'll likely do a bit of a follow up in future newsletters. So yeah, if you'd like some more details, do, and if you'd like a copy of our last version of our newsletter, do email the UK-client partnerships email address, which is on the screen now. So I've got this one here, and it says Zara have indicated that they will be closing stores and investing more into online following a 95% surge in April. Have we heard any similar stories from other retailers, and have any plans been revealed to enhance and improve the online experience? Jess, I don't know if you wanted to go and share if you've heard any sort of similar stories to this at all.
Yeah, definitely. I think obviously a lot of people have been spending more online because they can't in store, and I think so I'm really happy to hear that Zara are going to do this, and I hope they sort out their delivery times, because at the moment it takes an age. But yeah, I think anything that can come from this in terms of online, all stores have got to be looking and evaluating their current strategy in the space. And you know, your Zara's, your Primark's, your H&M's that previously didn't have as strong a presence, I think we've seen them all indicate that they're going to start looking at that. So if anything, it's sort of a bit of them being behind the trend, I think, and time for them to catch up, really.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I've got a comment here. So Paul sort of says that he couldn't agree more with actually your comment, Jess, about the sort of the local comment and about that continuing. Now this one might be an interesting one for you Joelle, and it says, do we feel that brick and mortar visits will become like a luxury treat, or for big ticket items versus the norm, sort of, and Paul uses in the same way that people used to display vinyl and CDs, but now music is all digital except that statement record sleeve that you may have on display. So Joelle, I don't know if you had any thoughts on how maybe the perceptions of in-store visits will be.
From a consumer perspective, definitely my perspective personally, I think they'll definitely become a treat, especially in the early stages, as we are probably slightly more nervous to be getting back to store, and the experience will be different with social distancing rules still in place. From a brand perspective, I also feel the same. I think as a brand, a lot of these companies, I mean, we have seen the rise in the shopping experience, and some of the brands are already ahead of the game in the likes of the large John Lewis stores having cafes and restaurants, and some of the top shops having beauty bars. But I think we'll continue to see that trend, and I think that will become the norm, that when you visit a store, it won't necessarily be just a general shopping experience for you to pick up a handful of items, but it will be much more than that, and a whole sort of health, beauty, social aspect to your shopping.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point about experiential retail, which I think was potentially something that was definitely emerging. So we've got this question here from Enrico, and he says and he asks if we're noticing a switch from the lack of offers to a decreasing demand in regions most hit by COVID. So he mentions GDP in the UK, Spain and Italy will likely fall by 2 digits this year, and unemployment will surge, and that's sort of according to the OECD. So his question around this is, do we forecast that an even higher revenue will be driven by discount code providers post lockdown? So I think in a similar way that a lot of these sites saw growth during sort of the last sort of major recession. Roz, I know you talked a little bit about publisher mix when you were looking at home entertainment, but I don't know if you had any thoughts on maybe the change in publisher mix as the economy sort of shifts.
Yeah, you're right. So when we looked at it from the entertainment space, that we definitely have seen an increase in the voucher code partners that we work with. They weren't the biggest driver, obviously direct linking and CSS was, but they had seen an increase. When we've looked at the network data overall during the pandemic, we have seen some increase in that sector, but actually it's been the content sites that have been the real winners and have taken up share, where we've seen declines in some other areas. I think it makes sense based on the logic that, you know, there is going to be obviously huge impacts on the economy everywhere globally with what's happened, and people were savvy and keen to have deals beforehand, and the idea that people might have less disposable income and want to make it go further when they are buying, I think it's a clear connection that there's going to be potentially more appetite for consumers to look for deals and to hunt out for voucher codes. We haven't seen a sharp increase in that sector overall, as I've mentioned. It has had a small increase, but it's not one of the ones that's kind of been top of the list. That's the content side of things. So it's an interesting point, and that could be something that we continue to investigate in more detail over the coming months, and to see if that shift does manifest itself in the data.
Cool, thank you very much. I think this is the last question, unless we get any more submitted whilst we answer it. This is just a general question: is have we seen an increase in the purchasing of eco-friendly products? So I guess I mentioned in my piece about cycling, and about how would there be any demand spikes there because people are enjoying the less pollution there. So we've seen increases there, but I don't know. I guess I'll open it up to the group. Have any of you noticed any sort of changes and trends in terms of eco-friendly product mixes? Jess, I think you might have some thoughts on this.
Yeah, not just eco-friendly, but it kind of falls into the same sort of vein as what Ros was saying about local. I know in our last webinar we found some trends around the smaller brands coming through onto like an online presence and taking up some of the market share. So I guess that's kind of in line with being eco-friendly and sustainable by shopping locally and seeking out like more niche products based around customer needs. So being a bit more picky about what you're looking at, and we saw some data from, was it SimilarWeb, Alex, correct me if I'm wrong, where people are searching to pages 2 and 3 of Google, not just page 1 for things. So they're definitely seeking out more desirables within their products, and that probably does have a correlation with the eco-friendly side if that's important to people as well. Yeah,
that's really good. We had a couple more questions that have just come in there. So if these will probably be the last couple of questions before we close the stream. But the first one is: should we be looking to utilize influencers in our marketing strategy? Joelle, I don't know if you wanted to share your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I'd love to. So I think, again, influencer marketing isn't new to lockdown. It is something that we had seen rise in the last couple of years, and it's definitely becoming more prominent. I'd say it's a very important part of people's marketing mix generally, both in terms of variation of content, but also the importance of unique content and content that is built from somebody that's not necessarily the brand. Influencers are really key in terms of getting to niche consumer groups that really resonate with your brand and resonate with the influencers in which they're following. And so I think it's a really great market. In terms of, as a result of what's happening at the moment, as a result of coronavirus, we've seen influencer marketing even stronger than ever. And I think there's two parts to that story. So first of all, the influencers themselves have more time at the moment to be creating this authentic content. And so we are seeing on Instagram more influencer content, longer stories, and more posts generally. And then from a consumer perspective, we also have the time to be browsing our social streams more often than usual. So as well as seeing longer stories, we're also seeing better engagement with those stories and with those posts. So more likes, more comments, and more shares.
Thank you very much. So the final question I'm going to ask, and what I'll do is I'll answer my response to it, and then I'll go to Jess, Joelle, and then I'll leave it to Ros to close the event. So the question is: what's been the most innovative response to the crisis you've seen from a retailer? So from my perspective, actually, one of the sort of responses I thought was really innovative was actually Free Mobile. So actually, Vicky from Free was actually on our telco webinar, but one of the things that they've been doing is they have quite a good sort of high street presence or shopping centre presence, where they serve obviously a really important role in educating consumers about handsets and helping them on board. And what I've seen is Free are doing a lot of like live product demos on their website and moving like a lot of embracing video as not just obviously as an internal tool, but as a way of sort of engaging with customers. And you can have your sort of video consultations with members of the Free sort of retail team. So I thought that was really innovative from my side. Jess, I don't know if there was any examples that you particularly liked in terms of innovative responses. You're on mute, Jess.
Sorry, it was bound to happen at some point. I think most sports retailers that I've seen, so your Nikes, your Gymsharks, have done a really good job of sort of bringing motivation for people to shop with them, and also like work out online with their Instagram. So bringing their social elements to their brands is really synonymous with that, and thinking of things that are going to stay past the coronavirus pandemic. I think that will be one of them, like enabling people to work out from anywhere really has been really impressive, and I've seen quite a few advertisers kind of jump on that trend.
Yeah, that's great. Joelle, do you have any examples that you've particularly enjoyed?
So from an innovation perspective, some of the campaigns that I've really liked are the advertisers who are selflessly investing in people staying at home. So one example was the Netflix example, where from the beginning of lockdown they were actually funding billboards that had spoiler alerts of some of the like really key series out at the moment, like Love is Blind and those sort of series, and to stop people going and seeing these billboards. And actually a site in the US did it as well. So they were a travel site, obviously linked with going out of your home, but actually they were encouraging people to stay home and to invest in loyalty points. All you had to do was stay home every day and visit their website and log that you'd stayed indoors, and as a result you were rewarded as part of their loyalty scheme.
Yeah, that's really great. Ros, do you want to share your thoughts and then close the webinar?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Alex. I think for me, it's actually linked to what Jess was saying about the sort of health and fitness sector. And I've been really impressed by how some of the yoga studios and bar studios and smaller local independent brands have really quickly adapted. And a lot of their teachers are using whether it's Zoom or Instagram, and have got out there and are doing classes on a live basis, so people can still get that experience, but from your own home. And some people are doing it on a donation basis. Some of that is linked up with the brand, and there's a sort of an official payment to go through and do those classes. But I was just impressed at how quickly that happened. And for me, somebody that has a young family, so it's quite difficult to actually get out to these places sometimes, it's been great to have this increase of different exercise that I can do at home that's not normally there. And it's really great to hear that a lot of these teachers and the brands supporting them are going to continue it on this basis because they've had such success. So I think there's some really positive things that have come out of it in terms of health and fitness and well-being generally. So I think that's it then. Many thanks for joining us today. If you'd like any further information, there's lots of information on the screen. There's our email address, the details of the Coronavirus Hub, and as we've mentioned, our newsletter, The Pulse, which we aim to send out in between these webinars so we can keep you up to date with insights. We're going to continue to dive into the data. We'll aim to do another webinar next month, which hopefully will have some of the early stats from the high street opening back up and seeing how that's impacting Awin in the channel. And we'll do sign up for the newsletter, The Pulse. There's details here, but we'll hopefully also include details when we send around the recording of this, and also the previous recordings are available if you'd like to take a listen to them. So we hope you enjoyed the session and that we'll see you again next month. Thank you and goodbye.